My name is Maren Callahan. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 9 years finding the exact dollar amount where a lie starts. That night, standing at the back of a room full of investors who trusted my family's name, I had two numbers in my head. One was the amount my brother had quietly moved out of the business over 18 months. The other was the number of seconds I planned to let the silence sit before I said anything at all. Neither number showed up on the screen behind me yet, but in about 11 minutes, they both would. And my brother had no idea that the laptop plugged into that projector wasn't running his slideshow anymore. It was running mine. Welcome back to her final chapter, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever been the responsible one in a family that only had room for one favorite, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. I want to back up, because none of that makes sense without knowing who I was before that room. I grew up in a town on the Maine coast where everybody's father either fished, built boats, or fed the people who did both. Mine did the third one. My grandfather, Frank Callahan, opened a 6-table seafood shack in 1974 called the Harbor Table, and by the time I was born, it had grown into 3 restaurants strung along the coast: Portland, Kittery, Bath, with my father, Owen, running the books and my grandfather still showing up every Sunday to taste the chowder himself. I grew up rolling silverware into napkins for spare change and learning to read a ledger before I learned to parallel park. That part mattered more than I understood at the time. I loved numbers the way some kids loved music, not because they were exciting, but because they were honest. A receipt didn't lie to you, a bank statement didn't tell you it loved you, and then forget your birthday. I used to sit at the hostess stand during Slow Tuesday lunches and audit the tip jar just for fun, counting it twice to make sure it matched what the shift log said. My grandfather thought it was hilarious. He called me his little inspector. Nobody thought it meant anything. It was just a quirk, the kind of thing you'd put in a yearbook under most likely to. I left for college at 20, got a degree in accounting, and by 26 I was a certified fraud examiner working forensic cases for a firm in Boston called Ashcroft & Lowe, the kind of firm companies call after they've already lost money and want to know exactly how. I was good at it, not because I was ruthless, because I was patient. Fraud isn't usually a single dramatic theft. It's 1,000 small inconsistencies that people hope nobody adds up. My job was to be the person who added them up anyway. My brother Derek stayed home. He was 3 years older, and from the time we were kids, he was the one who was going to run things. Not because he was better at it, because he wanted it out loud, and I wanted it quietly, and in my family, quiet always lost. The message came on a Wednesday from my mother at 9:14 in the morning. Family meeting Sunday, 5 p.m. at the house. Dad wants to talk about where the business is headed. Please come. I stared at it for a long time before I answered. We hadn't had a family meeting since the one 5 years ago that ended with my grandfather's restaurant empire split entirely in my brother's name and a $15,000 check placed in front of me like a tip. I still hadn't cashed it. It sat in a drawer in my apartment in Boston, uncashed, because cashing it would have meant agreeing that $15,000 was what 9 years of Sunday shifts and rolled silverware had been worth. Please come, my mother had written. Not, we'd love to see you. Not, we miss you. Please come, like an instruction, like I was a vendor being asked to confirm a delivery window. I called her back instead of texting. What's this about? Your father wants to talk about the future of the business, Maren. A pause. Don't make this complicated. There it was. The phrase, don't make this complicated. 5 words my mother had been handing me since I was 14 years old, usually right after I'd asked a question nobody wanted to answer. It had a twin, you always overthink things, Maren, and between the two of them, my family had spent 2 decades training me to believe that noticing things was a character flaw. I'm not making anything complicated, I said. I'm asking what a family meeting is about. You'll find out Sunday. And she hung up, the way she always did when she'd said exactly as much as she intended to. To understand why that call felt like a hand closing around my ribs, you have to understand what happened 5 years before it. My grandfather Frank died in March, 6 years ago, of a heart that had been quietly failing since before any of us knew to worry about it. He left behind a business worth, by conservative estimate, about $2.4 million in combined property, equipment, and goodwill across the 3 locations. His will, the actual, signed, notarized will, which I have a copy of to this day, named my brother and me as equal beneficiaries of the Harbor Table Family Trust, 50% each. His attorney, a soft-spoken man named Elias Whitmore, who'd known our family for 30 years, told me himself at the funeral reception, standing by the coat rack with a paper cup of coffee in his hand. Your grandfather was very clear. He wanted you both to have an equal stake. He said you were the one who understood what the numbers meant, and Derek was the one who understood what the customers wanted. He thought that was a good balance. That was the last time anyone used the word equal in relation to me and my brother. 11 months later, my parents called a meeting, not unlike the one they'd just called again, and informed me in the family dining room, over a lasagna my mother had made and nobody finished, that they had restructured the trust for stability. Derek would become sole managing member of Harbor Table Holdings. My shares would convert to a one-time buyout of $15,000, so everyone could move forward cleanly. I remember asking, very calmly, how a $1.2 million stake became $15,000. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother did the talking, the way she always did when the truth needed handling with gloves on. Derek's here every day, Marin. He's raising a family here. You have your life in Boston. This just makes sense for continuity. Grandpa wanted it split evenly. Grandpa wasn't thinking about what the business actually needs to survive, my mother said. You always overthink things. This isn't personal. It's practical. I sat at that table and did something I'm not proud of, but I understand now. I let it happen. I signed the paperwork releasing my claim to the trust 3 weeks later, not because I agreed with it, but because I was exhausted from being the only person in the room who thought fairness was a real thing and not a suggestion. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't need the restaurants. I had my own career, my own apartment, my own name on my own paycheck, and none of it depended on a seafood shack on the Maine coast. But here's the part I didn't say out loud to anyone, not even to Priya, my closest friend, for almost a year afterward. I didn't fight for the money because of the money. I fought for as long as I did because some small, stupid, hopeful part of me thought that if I just stayed reasonable long enough, they'd eventually let me back in anyway. Not as an owner, just as a daughter who mattered as much as her brother did. I kept showing up to birthdays. I kept sending Christmas gifts addressed to both nephews, even though only one of them was my brother's. I told myself it wasn't about the business at all. It was never about the business. I told Priya about the Sunday meeting over the phone that night, sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, which is where I do my best thinking and my worst decision-making, usually at the same time. Don't go, she said, in the flat, unbothered tone she uses when she already knows I'm going to go anyway. You don't owe them a Sunday. You barely owed them the last 9 years. It's my family. Your family gave you $15,000 for $1.2 million stake and called it stability. I heard her set something down hard on her counter. Marin, you built an entire career reading rooms like this for other people. You know exactly what it looks like when someone's setting a table for something they haven't told you about yet. I know. So why are you going? I didn't have a good answer. I still don't, not really, except that some doors you keep walking back toward even after you've learned exactly what's on the other side of them, because the alternative, closing it yourself permanently, on purpose, feels like a bigger loss than getting hurt one more time. I'm going, I said. Priya sighed. Then take your laptop. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't, not really. But I didn't understand that yet. The invitation had said family meeting. What I walked into, 3 Sundays later, was a house full of people I hadn't been told about. My parents' driveway had 11 cars in it. 11. I counted, because counting things is what I do when I'm nervous, and by the time I reached the front step, I already knew this wasn't going to be the 4 of us at the kitchen table like it had been 5 years ago. My mother opened the door in a dress I'd never seen, the kind you wear when you know there will be photographs. You're early, she said, which was strange because I was exactly on time. Who else is here? A few people from the business, investors, some friends. It's not a big deal. She was already turning away, already moving toward the noise coming from the backyard, where I could hear a string quartet, an actual string quartet, tuning up near what used to be my grandfather's tomato garden. It wasn't a big deal. It was a launch party for the reopening of the Portland flagship 3 weeks early, apparently, and nobody had mentioned that to me at all. I want you to sit with that gap for a second because it's the first crack in the wall. Family meeting had become 40 guests, a catering staff, and a quartet. What I'd been told and what was actually happening were no longer the same shape. And in my experience, professional and otherwise, that gap is where the real story always lives. I found the bar first, because I needed a minute before I found my brother. It was marble. Not laminate made to look like marble, actual veined, cold-to-the-touch marble, the kind that costs more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. Behind it, a bartender I didn't recognize was uncorking a bottle of wine I did, a Bordeaux that ran about $400 a bottle because I'd priced one exactly like it for a fraud case 8 months earlier, a company using client entertainment as a laundering line item. I picked up the wine list sitting on the bar, out of habit more than hunger, and my thumb found a typo in the second paragraph before I'd even registered I was looking for one. Complimentary appetizers. Should have been complimentary. I almost smiled. Some things about me never change, even in a room full of strangers holding champagne flutes. Then I looked past the bar, toward the kitchen door propped open with a cinder block, and saw something that stopped the smile cold. Leaning against the wall by the walk-in cooler was my grandfather's old recipe box. The actual metal one, the one with the dented corner from where I'd dropped it as a kid, the one that used to sit on the counter of the original Portland location like a small shrine. It had been shoved next to a stack of folded tablecloths like a piece of lost and found nobody had gotten around to throwing out yet. A $340,000 renovation, a string quartet, $400 Bordeaux, and the one object that actually represented what my grandfather built was gathering dust by the trash cans. I put it under my arm before I even decided to. Nobody stopped me. Nobody noticed. I found my brother by the pass-through window, mid-laugh, one arm around a man I didn't recognize in a gray suit that fit too well to be off the rack. "Marin!" Derek said it the way he says everything, like he's announcing it to a room rather than saying it to a person. "You made it. Good. Come here, Richard, this is my sister. She's an accountant." "Forensic accountant," I almost corrected, and then didn't, because I already understood I wasn't there to be introduced accurately. I was there to be introduced as decoration. Richard Voss shook my hand with the firm, appraising grip of someone who'd shaken a lot of hands attached to a lot of business decisions. "Derek's told us a lot about the family history here. Third generation, right? That's rare in this business. Most people can't make it past the first." "It's rare," I agreed. "He's been walking us through the expansion numbers," Richard went on. 2 new locations by next spring, if tonight goes the way he's expecting. We're talking about a real investment here." I felt something small and cold settle in my stomach. Nobody had mentioned an expansion to me either. Nobody had mentioned investors. I had been handed a $15,000 check and told my stake didn't matter for continuity. And now my brother was standing in front of strangers in gray suits raising money against a business built on my grandfather's name and, apparently, my absence. "Sounds like a lot's happened since the last time I heard an update," I said, keeping my voice level. Derek's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "You know how it is. Things move fast." "Sure," I said. "I'd love to see the numbers sometime." Marin. My mother had appeared at my elbow, the way she does, like she'd been listening from 6 feet away the whole time. "Don't start." I didn't say anything. "You always find a way to make an evening about spreadsheets." She said it lightly, the way you'd tease someone about a harmless little tick, the same tone she might use for a person who always brought up the weather. Around us, 2 of Derek's friends laughed, not unkindly, but not kindly either. The kind of laugh that agrees with the person in the room who has the most power, which that night was clearly not me. That was brick number 1. I stepped away, needing air, and found myself in the hallway outside my father's old home office. The room where, 5 years earlier, I'd sat and signed away a stake I never should have given up. The door was cracked open. A desk lamp was still on inside. I told myself I was just looking for a quiet minute. That's the truth, mostly. What I found was not what I went in looking for. On the desk, next to a stack of catering invoices, was a single manila folder that had slid halfway out of a banker's box, the kind you use when you're archiving old files and haven't quite finished the job. I wasn't snooping. I want to be honest about that, because it matters. I picked it up because the top page had slid loose and was about to fall on the floor, and some reflex in me, the same reflex that counts tip jars twice, reached to straighten it before it did. The top page was a wire transfer confirmation, $47,000, routed from Harbor Table Holdings to an entity called Anchor Point Holdings, LLC. Underneath it, another, $63,500, to the same account 4 months later. Underneath that, a third, smaller, to a second entity, Bayline Logistics, LLC, for $22,000, marked in the memo line as equipment consulting. I know what a legitimate vendor relationship looks like. I've built a career on knowing the difference between a real invoice and a hollow one. Real vendors have addresses that match real buildings. Real consulting fees have deliverables attached to them, reports, contracts, something. These had none of that. Anchor Point Holdings and Bayline Logistics were names I'd never heard associated with the restaurant group in 9 years of half listening to family business talk, and the total across just the 3 documents in front of me came to $113,500. Money that had left a business I'd been told needed stability so badly it couldn't afford to split fairly with the granddaughter who'd helped build it. I photographed all 3 pages with my phone, hands steady in a way that surprised me, and put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, corner slid half out of the box, lamp still on. Then I stood in that hallway for a long moment, listening to the quartet through the wall, and did the math a fraud examiner does automatically, almost without meaning to. 18 months of quarterly transfers at that rate could easily total somewhere north of $18,000. Money that hadn't gone into the reopening. Money that hadn't gone into new locations. Money that had gone somewhere with no invoices attached to it at all. I didn't know yet exactly where it had gone, but I knew what it looked like. I'd seen this shape 100 times in other people's businesses. I had just never expected to find it in my own family's. I went back outside because staying in that hallway any longer would have looked strange, and the last thing I wanted that night was to look like I'd found something. My hands were steady. My face, I hoped, was too. I found my father near the dessert table, and for one unguarded second before he saw me, he looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. Older, thinner around the eyes, a man carrying something he hadn't set down in a long time. It was the first crack of sympathy I'd let myself feel for him all night, and it surprised me more than the folder had. Whatever was happening in that business, I didn't think my father fully understood it either. Dad. Marin. He tried to smile. It didn't quite land. Big turnout, huh? Bigger than I expected. I studied him for a second. You look tired. It's been a lot, he said, and for a moment I thought he might actually say something real. Then my mother's voice cut across the yard. Owen, they're ready for the toast. And whatever had almost surfaced in him closed back up like a hand folding shut. That was the second brick. Not cruelty this time. Something sadder. A man too worn down, or too afraid, to say the true thing out loud, even when his daughter was standing right in front of him, holding proof in her phone that something in his business was badly wrong. Carol Jennings found me by the garden a few minutes later. She'd been our neighbor for 20 years, the kind of family friend who'd watched me grow up and never missed a chance to remind me of it. Marin, look at you. She air-kissed both my cheeks, the way she'd started doing sometime after her divorce and a trip to Europe. I haven't seen you since the funeral, I think. Your grandfather would be so proud of your brother tonight, wouldn't he? All this. She gestured at the marble bar, the quartet, the string of string lights overhead. He really turned this place around. He did, I said, because arguing with Carol Jennings had never once ended well for anyone. And what are you up to these days? Still doing your little numbers job? Little numbers job. 9 years of licensure, a certified fraud examiner credential, a caseload that had recovered millions of dollars for companies that trusted no one else to find it, reduced, cheerfully, to your little numbers job, the same tone you'd use for a child's lemonade stand. Something like that, I said. That was the third brick, small, almost affectionate, and somehow the one that stayed with me longest, because it was so casually delivered, like nobody in that yard had ever once considered that the thing I did for a living might someday matter to any of them at all. The toast came 20 minutes later. Derek stood on the back porch steps with a microphone someone had handed him, my parents flanking him like a campaign photo, and the whole yard turned to listen. He talked about legacy. He talked about vision. He thanked Richard Voss and the other investors for believing in what this family built. He thanked our parents for trusting me to carry it forward. And then, Because apparently the evening wasn't finished handing me bricks, he found me in the crowd, raised his glass in my direction with a grin that didn't reach past his teeth, and said, loud enough for every gray suit in that yard to hear. And to my sister Marin, who couldn't be here for most of this, but hey, she's always been the one who overthinks everything. I think tonight we can all agree sometimes it's better to just build the thing. Laughter. Warm, easy, at my expense laughter. My mother smiled like she was watching a home movie. My father looked at his shoes. She's always been the one who overthinks everything. Second time. Same words, almost exactly, that my mother had used on the phone 3 weeks earlier. You always overthink things, Marin. Now handed to a room full of strangers as a punchline, with my brother standing on the exact spot where our grandfather used to stand every Sunday to taste the chowder himself. I didn't say anything. I raised my glass a half-inch, the smallest gesture I could get away with, and let the laughter pass over me like weather. But somewhere behind my ribs, the last of my hesitation quietly finished dissolving. I thought about the manila folder. I thought about Anchor Point Holdings. I thought about the recipe box gathering dust by the trash cans. And I thought, overthinking was never my flaw. It was the only reason I was standing in that yard already knowing something none of them did. Stay with me here, because what happened next, I planned in less time than it takes to dry your hands. I excused myself to the bathroom 15 minutes later, and instead of the bathroom, I went to my car. My laptop was in the trunk. Priya's instinct, not mine, and I owed her more than I'd ever admit out loud for that. I sat in the driver's seat with the dome light off, pulled the 3 photographed documents up on my screen, and cross-referenced Anchor Point Holdings and Bayline Logistics against the Maine Secretary of State's business registry using my phone's hotspot. It took less than 4 minutes to confirm what I already suspected. Both entities had been registered 18 months earlier, on the same filing date, by the same registered agent, a P.O. box 40 minutes from the flagship restaurant, with no employees, no website, no public footprint of any kind. Shell companies. Textbook, almost lazy ones. I built 4 slides. Not a dramatic presentation. 4 clean slides, the kind I'd built 100 times for boardrooms that had never once been my own family's. Transfer dates, amounts, entity names, registration data. At the bottom of the 4th slide, in small type, 1 line, total identified transfers, 18 months, $113,500 confirmed, estimated 18,000 plus pending full review. Then I did the part that mattered most. I found the AV cart tucked against the fence near the string lights, where a young guy named Miguel was managing the projector feed for the slideshow Derek had prepared. Photos of the renovation, the grand opening banner, a countdown clock ticking toward the official ribbon cutting. I asked him, politely, professionally, whether I could plug in for one quick family addition to the toast. Derek's idea, actually, a surprise for our parents. It wasn't a lie so much as an omission wearing a lie's coat. Miguel shrugged and handed me the HDMI cable without a second thought. Nobody questions the woman with a laptop and a calm voice at a party full of people who've spent all night calling her the responsible one. I didn't project anything yet. I waited. They called me up for the family remarks portion of the evening about 10 minutes later. My mother's idea, I found out afterward, meant as a small, condescending olive branch, a chance for me to say something nice about my brother in front of the investors, so the evening would look, in every photo, like a united family. She handed me the microphone herself, smiling the practiced smile she saves for cameras. "Just keep it short and sweet," she murmured, low enough for only me to hear. "Don't make this complicated, Marin." 3rd time. Same phrase, almost word for word, now delivered as a direct instruction in front of 40 guests, 2 investors, and a projector I'd already loaded with the truth. I let the silence sit. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Long enough that Richard Voss shifted his weight. Long enough that Derek's smile started to falter at the edges, unsure, for the first time all night, of what was coming next. Long enough that my mother's hand, still resting near my elbow, tightened just slightly, the way it used to when I was a kid about to say something at dinner she didn't want said. "I won't make it complicated," I finally said, my voice steady, quiet, carrying anyway because the whole yard had gone quiet with it. "I'll just show you the numbers instead." I clicked to the first slide. For half a second, nobody understood what they were looking at.
A wire transfer confirmation is not a dramatic image, not the kind of thing that reads instantly as a bomb going off. Then Richard Voss, standing near the front with a glass of the $400 Bordeaux still in his hand, leaned forward and read the routing amount out loud, almost to himself. 47,000. To an entity called Anchor Point Holdings, I said, clicking to the second slide. Registered 18 months ago. No employees, no storefront, no public records of any services rendered. Click. 63,500, 4 months later. Same entity. Click. 22,000 to a second shell, Bayline Logistics, labeled as equipment consulting, for a business that hasn't purchased new equipment in that time frame, according to the vendor invoices I reviewed on the desk in that office an hour ago. Derek's laugh came first, the way it always does when he's scrambling, loud, easy, performative. Okay, Marin, this isn't the time. You said keep it short, I said, not unkindly. I am. He tried again, stepping toward Miguel's cart. Cut the feed. Miguel hesitated, looking between us, and in that half-second of hesitation, Derek reached for the laptop himself and yanked the HDMI cable, except it wasn't plugged into my laptop anymore. I'd routed it through a second wireless connection the moment I saw him move, a trick I'd used exactly once before, in a boardroom in Hartford, on a man who thought pulling a cord could stop a truth that was already airborne. The slide stayed exactly where it was. Derek stood there holding a dead cable in his hand in front of 40 people, having just publicly confirmed with his own body that he had something to hide. The Wi-Fi's doing something weird, he said. To no one. To everyone. His voice climbing half an octave. He tried once more, jabbing at buttons on the card itself, and the slide only sharpened, Miguel stepping back with his hands raised, wanting no part of whatever this had become. Each attempt landed worse than the last, in front of the exact people whose money he'd spent all evening chasing. Richard Voss set his wine glass down on the marble bar with a small, deliberate click that somehow carried across the whole silent yard. Is there a fourth slide? He asked me directly, not Derek. His voice was calm, professional, the voice of a man who'd sat through a lot of pitch meetings and had just realized which one this actually was. There is, I said, and clicked to it. Total identified transfers, 18 months, $113,200 confirmed, estimated 18,000 or plus, pending full review. I'm a certified fraud examiner. I found these an hour ago in a folder in my father's office entirely by accident. I haven't reported anything to anyone yet. I wanted my family to hear it from me first, tonight, before I recommend an independent audit to whoever's actually putting money into this business. The yard was so quiet I could hear the quartet's cellist set her bow down. Derek found his voice last, thin and cornered. You don't get to do this. You're not even part of this business anymore. I looked at him for a long moment. My brother, who I had once, a very long time ago, actually loved without complication. And I said the only thing I had left to say, quiet enough that it didn't need volume to land. I don't owe you my silence, Derek. I never did. Richard Voss left within the hour, along with 2 of the other investors, without finishing their drinks. By Tuesday, his firm had formally withdrawn its letter of intent for the expansion financing, citing unresolved financial irregularities requiring independent review, language I recognized immediately because I'd written variations of it myself, professionally, more times than I could count. The independent audit I'd recommended happened, though not through me. I recused myself entirely, on the advice of my own firm's ethics counsel, and handed the documentation instead to a colleague at a separate practice with no family connection to any of it. Within 6 weeks, the audit confirmed what those 3 pages in the hallway had already suggested. Just over $184,000 diverted through Anchor Point Holdings and Bayline Logistics over 18 months, funneled largely into a boat Derek had purchased under a friend's name, and a series of losses at an out-of-state card room nobody in the family had known he frequented. He wasn't charged criminally. The restaurant group's board, which by then included 2 of my grandfather's oldest friends brought in specifically to stabilize things, negotiated a settlement instead. Derek stepped down as managing member, repaid what could be recovered from the sale of the boat, and Harbor Table Holdings was placed under professional management while the family sorted out what came next. My parents didn't call to apologize. I want to be honest about that. because these stories don't always end with the clean, tearful reckoning everyone hopes for. My mother sent one text, 4 days after the party. I hope you're happy. You humiliated this family in front of everyone. I read it twice and didn't answer, because there was nothing in it I needed to argue with, and nothing in it I needed to accept either. What I did get, about 3 weeks later, was a small padded envelope with no return address. Inside was my grandfather's old recipe box, the dented one from the trash pile, and a short note, unsigned, in handwriting I recognized immediately as my father's. He would have wanted you to have this. I should have said so a long time ago. No apology for the trust, no mention of Derek. Just that, and the box, sitting now on my own kitchen counter in Boston, dented corner and all. I called Carol Jennings a week after that, on impulse, mostly to see if she'd heard anything. She had. Your grandfather, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, none of the party brightness left in it at all. Used to tell me you were the only one of the two of you who ever actually listened when he explained the books to you. He said Derek liked being the owner. He said you liked understanding what ownership actually meant. She paused. I should have said that to you at the party instead of the other thing. I'm sorry, honey. It wasn't a big moment. It didn't undo the little numbers job comment, or the years before it. But it was real, and it was hers to give freely, without me asking for it, and that made it worth more than almost anything my parents could have said. I didn't destroy my family that night at the reopening. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to tell this story as a triumph, and it wasn't, not entirely. I just stopped protecting a version of events that had never once protected me. Everything that happened after that toast, the audit, the settlement, the quiet unraveling of my brother's version of himself, was already true before I said a word. I didn't create it. I just refused to keep standing in a room pretending I hadn't seen it. That's the part I want you to take with you, if you take anything at all. The truth doesn't need you to be loud. It just needs you to stop being quiet on someone else's behalf. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to her final chapter, because there's another one waiting for you next week.